Well, for me anyway, it's been an incredible journey going through the book of James again. I've told you before that it doesn't matter how many times you go through something in Scripture, each time can be fresh, and each time the Lord can reveal. And certainly He has done that with me. And the book of James is probably one of the books that I've read more than a lot of the others in the New Testament. And yet each time it's always fresh and it's always new. And so we're going to bring it to a close tonight. And we're going to be looking at chapter 5. So in your manuals, page 60. In your Bibles, it's page 1499. Thank you. So I would encourage you, I'm being facetious, obviously it'll be different if you have in your Bibles, but if you want to have an open Bible, if you have one, when we look at this, to be able to look at the Scriptures as we unfold this. All right, so I know that they're in your manual as well, but it's always good to do something with an open Bible. All right, so the title of James chapter 5 is Patience, Prayer, and Restoration. Patience, Prayer, and Restoration. So he's bringing all of this to a close for those that he's writing to. Remember, he's writing to believers, Jewish believers. These were all Jewish believers that had been dispersed, and they had been scattered, physically, literally scattered. Many of them were fairly new believers, but they were going through great persecution, and they were going through some problems in the church, and much worldliness had been entered into the church. And a lot of this was, the reason for this is because of the response to the persecution that they were facing, that they were not getting good godly wisdom, but they were handling things in the wisdom of man. And it wasn't working out. They were having some problems. We talked about it last week, and I think the week before, about in chapter 4, how it dealt with their problems that they were having with quarrels and murders and covetousness and all these things that they're having. So much so that James says you're adulteresses. You're moving away from your husband, which is Christ. And that was the picture that we have. And so he finally gets to this point in chapter 5. And we call it chapter 5, but when James wrote it, he wasn't writing down chapters. It was just one letter, right? We have chapters, numbers to break it up, but James didn't ever tell his readers, now turn to chapter 5. This was just one letter that they would have read. But for our sake, chapter 5 is where we're going to be. And he starts it off in the first few verses 1 through 6, as a warning to the rich. And this is a powerful, powerful statement. Remember, we ended the last chapter with, he that knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Now, it reads this: Come now, you rich, and weep and howl for your miseries that are coming to you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out. And the cries of the reapers, or the harvesters, the workers basically, have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Sabaoth, or Sabaoth is pronounced. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury, and have fattened your hearts as in the day of slaughter. You have condemned, and you have murdered the just, and he does not resist you. Man, it's pretty strong, isn't it? It's pretty strong words. James turns his attention to the rich. They have been he has been hovering over this throughout the letter, right? Chapter 1 included the challenge to see that humble circumstances have distinct spiritual benefits in verses 9 through 11 in chapter 1, as opposed to riches. I would encourage you to look at those when you have some time, just to see. James has talked about rich or the wealthy several times in his letter. James warned in chapter 2 of the destructiveness of preferential treatment based on wealth in the church, in the gatherings. And at the end of chapter 4, James warned against being seduced by the world, which includes the riches of the world. And he begins chapter 5 by warning the wicked wealthy of their hopeless end and the worthlessness of their riches, that their wealth will not save them from God's justice. So what does all this mean? The term "come now," again, is a term that means it's in English terminology and Greek terminology. It speaks in the present imperative, which means it's a command. Imperative means it's a command, and it is a command calling for the reader to give continual attention to what follows in the light of what came before. So he says, "Come now, you rich, pay attention to what I'm fixing to tell you." And that's partly based on what he's also said before. And so this is the second time, if you remember, that he uses this phrase, "come now." The first time was in chapter 4 when he said, "Come now, you who say." Remember, you who say, "We're going to go and do this in this city and build in this city and do this." And so you remember that? So this time he says, "Come now, you rich." And it is connected to the last verse in chapter 4 where he said, "To them, there's him that knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." And the connection is this: the rich to whom he speaks of know what is right to do, but do not do it. They know they should treat their workers and everyone else with justice, but instead they exploit the poor. But they know better, but they do it anyway. This section that we read here as a warning to the wicked rich is also a prophetic warning, not just to that generation, but to all generations until the coming of the Lord. In other words, all of those who would have riches and power because of those riches, pay attention to this and be warned that your riches may help you here, but they will not save you from the justice of God if you use your riches to exploit others. That's the point. For those, we're on page 61. So he's saying, for those who trust in their riches and believe it gives them power to treat others unjustly, and that it gives them safety and comfort, what are they told? Look at what they are told. They are told to weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. That's not light reading. I mean, it's pretty strong. The word weep means to weep aloud, and howl means to cry out audibly. And the terminology means this: to express feelings that are too intense for words. Have you ever been so devastated by something that you see happening? Maybe it's in your own life that you didn't have words to express what you were feeling. All you could do is weep aloud or even cry out and just in agony of what's happening to you in your life. This is what he's saying to them. Weep aloud, howl, cry out audibly because of the miseries that are coming upon you. So let's look at the key themes and meaning in this. First, it's a warning to the wealthy. But James is not condemning wealth itself, but the misuse of it. And that's important, especially hoarding and exploitation. Hoarding and exploitation. James, so who's he speaking to here? So that's also debated by a lot of commentators as to who is James speaking to here. Is he speaking to the those that are outside the church? And I kind of have that in my notes here. He could be speaking to the wicked wealthy, or he could be speaking to the wicked wealthy people of the world that are outside the church, or he could be speaking to the wicked wealthy who profess Christian faith and have associated themselves with the church, but whose real God is money. John MacArthur believes the second one. Others say, no, he's talking to the wicked wealthy outside of the church. He couldn't possibly be talking to people that are inside the church. I have a tendency to think that certainly it applies to both groups of people, whether they're inside the church or outside the church. But I think that probably MacArthur is probably right. The wicked wealthy who profess Christian faith but have associated themselves with the church, but their real God is money. Certainly, we could certainly see that in our time, but it applies to both groups. That it's really not so important as to who we want to pinpoint it to, is why he is saying it. And how does that apply? And does it apply to us, right? Even a little bit in some areas of our life, even though we might not think that we're wealthy. One of the key themes also is the decay of riches. How many of you know that your possessions that you have on this earth are temporary? They're going to rot. How many of you know when you buy a brand new vehicle that you've always wanted, that a month later it's already depreciated a lot from its original value? How many of you know nothing on this earth that is man-made, nothing that we have is going to last forever? Material possessions are temporary. They rot, they corrode, and ultimately they testify against those who trust them. That's what verse 3 said. Verse 3 said, your gold and your silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. Yet, now I want you to just, we get so, Brother Mickey and I were talking about this a little bit in a different context, but we have so much Bible. We've heard it so much, and we probably heard this so much that we don't realize sometimes what the Bible is actually saying. Do you know that if James were here today and he were to preach like this in most of our churches, he would not be invited back? Nobody wants to hear that. Did you hear what he said? I mean, do we understand what he said here? Your gold and silver are corroded, and the corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. James, that's a little harsh. Come on. Let's be a little bit more diplomatic here. You know, we need these wealthy people in our church. We don't want to offend them, James. What are you doing? I mean, to be honest with you, most pastors, if James were to come in their church and preach that, and you had some wealthy people, and I've been in churches. We don't have any millionaires in our church that I'm aware of. But I don't think we do, you know, unless BJ's holding back, you know. But I've been in church where I've talked to people who were millionaires in church. I've met them, and you know what else I've seen? I've seen pastors like, oh, come on, you know, we want to keep them happy, right? And we just the ends are what is that saying? The means justify the ends, or the ends justify the means. The ends justify the means. Thank you, Brother Mickey. My mind wasn't working. And that's how we justify it. Oh yeah, but look at all the money we're getting for the glory of God. But that's what James was talking about earlier. You give the rich the best seats in the house, and you tell the poor man, sit over here. So what are we doing? And so James is saying, look, this is what's going to happen to their wealth. And if you're trusting in it, this is what is going to happen to it. James wasn't really ta-ta here. And if James were to do that in most of our churches, we would kick him out and we would say, James, you can't say that here. So we need to understand the weight of the words that he's saying. He's saying heaping. He talks about heaping up treasure for the last days, how it will not save them from judgment that is to come, unless they were to repent, right? And then he talks about another key theme here was injustice to workers, which was holding wages was the idea, and that it was considered a grave sin, by the way. And remember, he's talking to Jewish believers. There's a passage in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 13. I have it in your notes. This is what it says. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. You know what that means? That means, in other words, they were to pay them a day's wages at the end of the day. That was how they did it. Now, our structure is different, right? We don't. But in that time, the idea is that for them to survive, they need their money every day. It wasn't like today, where we can get it once a week or whatever, however you get paid. They needed their wages every day. A man went to work for a day, he needed his money that day. And for somebody to withhold that money until morning was hurting them. And the Bible, God really said, no, you don't do that. That was very, very strong. This is what James is alluding to right here. This is the same thing. You know, and then, so we have to understand that God hears the cries of the oppressed. The cries, it says that the cries of the reapers or the laborers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Now, that word means Lord of hosts. It's translated like that in a lot of more modern translations. Lord of hosts or Lord of armies. And the implication was clear here. The term was clear that the Lord himself will bring justice one day. The cries of these workers who have been cheated have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts, the Lord that has armies, the Lord who can come and take care of this. Think of it like this. The legion of angels that were held back when Jesus was arrested and crucified will one day be unleashed. Do you hear what I said? Do we hear what I'm saying? See, all of what he's talking about is in context, by the way, of the coming of the Lord. When the Lord, he's going to take care of this, right? He's going to deal with this, those who have done this. In other words, the idea is that justice will always happen. Even though we don't think it's happening in front of our eyes when we see it, we have to know that in the end, nobody gets away with anything. If people have power on earth because of their wealth and influence and power, and they're not doing right by people, and say, well, they're not getting their justice. James is saying, oh yes, they will. Yes, they will. They're going to get their justice. And the angels, the legion of angels that Jesus was talking about when he told Peter, put away your sword. Now's not the time. Don't you know that if I wanted to, I could call a legion of angels to come and take care of this? Why? Because Jesus, even though he was in the flesh, was still Lord of hosts. He was Lord of hosts. He could have. That same group one day will be unleashed for justice in the world. So this is what he's saying. And there's a reason why he's saying this, right? I can't spend as much time on all this as I'd like, otherwise we'll never get finished with the rest. But So he's condemning, uh, not condemning. I have on here luxury and indulgence, but it's not just the idea of living well. It's the idea of living only for pleasure while ignoring justice and righteousness. And it says it likens it to fatting oneself for the slaughter. That's the terminology that it uses there in verse 5. The passage ends with a stark accusation. Those in power have condemned and even killed the innocent who do not resist. He's saying there's justice coming for them. One Jewish writer, he said this: the bread of the needy is the life of the poor. Whoever deprives them of whoever deprives them of it is a man of blood. To take away a neighbor's living is to murder him. To deprive an employee of his wages is to shed blood. It's a powerful statement, but it's absolutely biblical in its nature. God took this type of thing seriously. On the next page is just several scriptures, a couple of different scriptures and quotes that really bring this home. One of them is somewhat familiar to you in Ecclesiastes 5:15. As he has come naked out from his mother's womb, so will he return the same. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. In other words, we're going out just like we came in, with nothing. C.H. Spurgeon said this: nothing influences a man so much as what he calls his own. You know what he meant by that? Think of the rich young ruler who would not follow after Jesus because he had much riches that he called his own. And he couldn't give it up. Think of that. I'm not going to give you all the quotes, but I do want to bring one to your attention. You actually possess everything you can see when your eyes are closed. We think we possess stuff, but we really don't. Right? We really don't. 1 Timothy 6:6. Now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich and fall into temptation and snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the what? The love, not money, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and have pierced themselves through with many sorrows. One of the quotes that I wanted to read actually is just right above that. Matthew Henry, a famous commentator, said this: a man takes great pains to heap up riches, to heap them up, and they are like heaps of manure in the furrows of the field, good for nothing unless they be spread. Isn't that powerful? Isn't that powerful? The illustration that put at the bottom, Brother Mickey, why don't you read that illustration at the bottom of page 62? Can you read that for us?
Okay. A businessman once had an angel visit him, promising to grant one request. The man asked for a copy of the stock market, page 1, year in the future. As he was studying the numbers on the future exchange and gloating over how much he would make because of his knowledge of the future, his eye glanced across the page. His picture was in the obituary column. Suddenly his new wealth faded into insignificance and light of his own death. Well, it is a good tool if we are careful to use it as stewards for the Lord. But it is a dangerous trap if we adopt a worldly perspective.
Isn't that powerful? And that really explains everything that I think James is saying. The very next part that he talks about, we're going to page 63, is entitled Patience and Suffering. Kind of switches gears a little bit in verses 7 through 11. So he says, after he just scolds the wealthy wicked, he says, now, therefore, be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and the latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. And you have heard of the perseverance of Job and have seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate, merciful. What a stark contrast from these two sections. The theme in this section is patience and endurance in the face of trials. The main imagery that we see is the farmer waiting for the rain and harvest, the prophets enduring suffering, and Job's steadfastness. The key truth here is that God's timing is sure. I want you to stop and think about that. I want you to stop and think about something in your own life that you've been waiting for. And you've been waiting for God. You've been asking God to help you in this and asking God to bring this to pass. Hear that statement. God's timing is sure. His compassion is real, and his mercy sustains us. Sustains us. This section is a clear contrast to the previous section. Now he speaks to brethren, brothers and sisters in Christ, in a tender, encouraging tone compared to the condemnation of the wicked rich. If you notice, there was a word that was repeated often in this section. What's the word? Patience. Patient. So the key word here in this section is patience or patient. And it's mentioned 4 times in these verses. The word patient 3 times, the word patience once. But the words mean basically the same thing. I laid this out for you, by the way, and this is hopefully this helps you in where I'm giving you a little bit of a word study that I would do, and that probably Brother Mickey does too whenever he looks at these things. It's not important to pronounce the Greek word. That number next to the word is from the Strong's numbering system, Strong's Concordance, meaning if you wanted to take a Strong's Concordance and look up that word, that would be the number. 3114 and the other one is 3115. Both words mean similar things. Patient, the word patient, which is 3 times, is a Greek verb meaning long-tempered, to defer anger, refusing to retaliate with anger because of human reasoning. In the literal sense of the term, it is extending a long time, a long way. That's the idea. It is long-suffering because it expresses anger as the Lord directs, the opposite of being quick-tempered. Now remember how I said that everything you're going to see in the latter stages of the book after chapter 1, all of them will connect to something that was said in chapter 1. And this term, being patient, is just the opposite of this. Remember we said everybody be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, slow to anger. That patience is the key to that. This word is the key to that. And then the word patience that is used is a similar, but it's a noun. It means the same thing, basically, as the above, just one's a verb and one's a noun. So they mean exactly the same thing. So this word patience is the word that's used in Galatians chapter 5 as a noun, describing the character trait of patience in us, but as provided by the Spirit. So it is a fruit of the Spirit, meaning that the only way that we can operate in this patience is by the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit operating in us, as opposed to man's wisdom. We want the godly wisdom and the fruit of the Spirit. So the only difference between these two words is the verb is practicing patience in the moment, and the noun is possessing patience as a character trait. Does that make sense? Now, so this is what this was emphasized in this section. Be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. And then he tells them to wait patiently, right? And then he says, you also be patient and establish your hearts. And at the end, he says, as an example of suffering and patience. It's so that means, that word means something. How many of you agree that we all need patience? How many would agree that you need patience? Because when I say we all need patience, it's easy for us to be like, yeah, I know a few people who do. But we, right? We need patience. So let's look at the verses really quick. Verse 7. Verse 7 emphasizes, be patient until the coming of the Lord, waiting on the Lord. Patience is rooted in the hope of Christ's return, to know that he's going to take care of it all. By the way, this is what he was emphasizing here to the church. Yes, look, I've just scolded the wicked rich, but don't look at them and think justice is not coming. Your job is not to retaliate, but to be patient and let the Lord do it. This is what he's saying. He uses the metaphor, farming metaphor. Growth takes time, and harvest requires trust in whose provision? God's provision. In the farming sense, the rain. For us, the refreshing of the Spirit, or everything God provides for us. So patience is also rooted in trust or faith in God's provision. So when you feel like, even when you feel like somebody's cheating you, remember, you belong to the Lord. You are not under their power. Be patient and allow the Lord to do his work. Wait on the Lord. And then verse 8 emphasizes establishing our hearts. So patience is active. It's strengthening faith, not passive waiting. It's not just kind of like, well, all I can do is just wait and see what happens, what can I do? Just wait and see. No. We should be pressing into God. And we should be allowing God to do in us what needs to be done, like not just passively waiting for anything to happen to us. Occupy till I come. Establish your hearts. Establish means to give support, to secure, to firmly establish. Solidly plant, that's what it means, which eliminates vacillation. In other words, it's solid. It's not going to shake. When the wind comes, it's not going to blow it away. The idea is like setting a post in the ground, but in concrete. Like it's not just in loose ground. You've got a concrete base on it, and it's not going anywhere. That's the picture. Establish your hearts, right? That's the idea. And how do we do that? Of course, we do that by faith in his word and what he says, and believing and trusting exactly what he says. Oftentimes we say we believe God, but when hard times hit us, we lean back on ourselves and on our wisdom and man's wisdom. but he's calling us to establish our hearts in him, so that even when the storms come, and even when the wicked rich of this world seem to have total control of everything, and the world's going crazy, and we have no power, remember that they only have, if they have any power at all, it's only temporary, because everything that they have will waste away, and their miseries will come if they do not repent and turn to God. Whereas you, as the believer, Paul said that in this present time, these present suffering cannot be compared to the glory which shall be revealed. We have something that's so much greater as a believer than anything in this world. You have more riches as a believer than Elon Musk. You have. Let me ask you this. Let me ask you, and I'm serious about the question. You think about what I'm asking you. If Elon Musk came up to you and said, I'll give you half of my wealth, which is pretty good, right? I don't know what he's worth right now, but half of his wealth would, be amazing. And all you've got to do, deny your faith. All you got to do is just deny your faith. I'm not saying he would. I'm just using him as an example, so nobody get mad. And nobody send me messages about, hey, why are you picking on Elon Musk? I'm not. I'm just using him as an example because he has a lot of money. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Yet, think about the reason why it's so easy for us to be like, oh, well, never. It's because we know that's not going to happen. Right? But if it was a reality, I guarantee you the devil would be in your ear, and your own reasoning would start to think, well, the Lord knows my heart. I could deny it, the faith, openly, but still, God knows my heart. Imagine all the good I could do with that money. BJ, imagine how much people I could help if I just had that. It's just words anyway. I deny my faith. It's okay. I don't really mean it, so just put one over on him. Why? Because we would immediately start thinking like, well, this could set me up pretty good. See, it's a little bit more tempting than we think, right? That's why we have to establish our hearts. Because this world will bring all kinds of temptations to us. The coming of the Lord motivates our perseverance. We believe he is coming. We know that he's going to set it right. We know and we trust that in the end, he will make all things right. So verse 9 says, do not grumble against one another. Because trials often tempt us to complain or blame. I'm talking to the people who are not here, not y'all. Just people who are not here. In verse 9, it uses the terminology, the Lord is at the door. And that term means the Lord has drawn near. That's what it means. It doesn't just mean his second coming. It means now. Now, he has drawn near. The idea is that he sees everything. That's the idea. He sees everything, right? He's not oblivious somewhere going, oh, I'm glad you told me about that. I never noticed what was happening there. No. The Lord has drawn near. He's at the door. Patience includes kindness in unity and community is part of the idea here. Let me ask you a question. Is grumbling against one another what we want him to find us doing when he returns? No, it's not, right? That term grumble, by the way, in case you don't know what it means, it has the idea of an internal and unexpressed frustration. It means to sigh and to groan with frustration. In other words, it may not be real audible complaining. It's more of an under your breath kind of attitude. That's what grumbling is. It's not the kind that you hear openly expressed loudly. It's the sighing and groaning and frustration on the inside of grumbling. You know, you understand what I'm saying? So that brings it more into just our words that we express outwardly, but the condition of our heart says, don't grumble against one another, frustrated with one another. Like you can work with somebody, but you really hate them. I mean, have you ever, don't point anybody in the room, but have you ever, you come to church with somebody, you go to work with somebody, you live with somebody, or whatever the case, but you're just constant, they frustrate you all the time. You're just constantly grumbling on the inside. It's just because you're always frustrated. That's the picture that we have here. And can I tell you that this condition is rampant in the world today? People are just living frustrated with people. Just frustrated. If you don't believe that, get on the road. Drive. Like, people are just like crazy. It's just like, what's going on? And it's almost like, it's like, just get out of my way kind of attitude. It's like, it's a spirit of grumbling. It's the spirit. But James is saying this: do not do that. As child of God, as a children of God, you are not to act this way. This wisdom comes from the world and it's devilish. But you are not to be so as a believer. We are not to have this kind of thing in our hearts especially towards our brothers and sisters in the church, but not even to the world. Not even to those who use and abuse us. How? Because that's who God is. And He lives in us, and the fruit of the Spirit must operate in the believer so that we actually are different. See, verse 10 talks about taking example, or as an example, take the prophets. Prophets endured suffering faithfully, showing that obedience often involves hardship. You have heard of this Job's suffering in verse 11. Job illustrates endurance through suffering. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure, it says, which takes us back to chapter 1 and verse 12, where it said, blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive a crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love Him. That statement in chapter 1 can be directly applied here as well. God's purpose is revealed as compassionate and merciful, even in trials. At the very end of this section, it says, the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. All right, let's quickly look at the next section, the power of prayer. Chapter 5, verse 12. But above all, brethren, do not swear by heaven, by earth, or with any oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, lest you fall into judgment. Is there anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is there anyone cheerful? Let him sing songs. Is there anyone sick? Let him call for the elders of the church and let him pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. Confess your trespasses one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of the righteous man avails much. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. Now, this is one of those sections where you don't want to overthink the individual verses. What is he talking about here? These last verses in this letter basically give instructions on what it looks like to walk in patience and perseverance with one another, serving the Lord during trying times. Look at it that way. This is what he's telling them. Above all, meaning, like, this is important. This is very important. If you're going to be patient during all of it, if you're going to live like that, if we're going to be what we need to be, this is what it should look like. And he gives these instructions. And the first thing he says, and also notice how all of these instructions, they're proactive, not passive. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll show you what we mean as we go through it really quick. So verse 12 warns against swearing oath. That doesn't mean, he's not talking about swearing in what we think. Do not swear. We tell our kids, do not swear. We mean do not cuss. But no, this is literally swearing. It's meaning don't swear on the Bible. Don't swear on heaven. Don't let your words be, like that. Like, you ask somebody, well, is it true what you said? I swear to God. I swear on the Bible. You say, well, Pastor, is that what he's talking about? For our purposes, yes. He uses the terminology, let your yes be yes and your no be no. The idea of that is this, that you should live your life in such a way, you should be such a person of character and integrity that if I tell BJ, hey, such and such happened, BJ's like, well, I swear to God, man, because he's not sure what I'm... Say, is it that simple? Yeah, I mean, we could get into some details about what their culture saw it as and everything, but that's the idea, is that our yes should be yes and our no should be no, and that we should walk as people who, when we say yes and when we say no, that's enough. That we shouldn't have to swear on the Bible. Like, you shouldn't have to go home to your wife and say, were you out there doing something you weren't supposed to do? I swear to God, I swear on the Bible, I would swear. What? I'd be curious if somebody responded like that. Well, why are you getting so crazy? And simple no would be fine. No, I wasn't doing anything wrong. Do you follow what I'm saying? So that's the picture. That's the idea. That's the idea of that. So in verses 13 and 15, he gives these practical guidance. Listen to what he says. If you're suffering, whine. No, that's not what he said. Pray. What? Proactive. You pray. If you're cheerful, sing praise. If you're sick, call for the elders of the church to pray and anoint with oil, and that the prayer of faith will save the sick. But see, the person who is suffering is to pray, not just to ask others to pray. They should pray. If you see, I want you to get this idea here, because it's showing how community should live in patience, a community of believers. If this is not focused on just individuals by themselves, but how a community of believers should respond. Also think of it in the light of what Jesus said. Mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who rejoice. How a community of believers should walk with each other in what they're facing. But if you're suffering, pray. If you're cheerful, sing praise. If you're sick, call for the elders. It doesn't mean, it's not, the elders here does not mean some arbitrary board of men at a church somewhere. It means those who are elders in the faith. Those, in other words, men of God, and it could be women of God too, that believe God, that trust God. Don't go and pray with negative people. Don't ask negative people to pray for you. There are some people you shouldn't call to pray for you. I mean that. You want people who are going to pray. You want people who are going to believe that they can touch God and encourage you and strengthen you. You don't want people that are going to pray a little bit and then complain and grumble. All right, we're going to pray, but we're also going to grumble. Stay away from that. That's not helping at all. Remember Jesus when he entered into one of the places and there were just people going, they were just, oh, he's dead, they're gone, Jesus said, send them all out, please. Okay, all right. We're not ready. All right, but you get the idea. The prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise him up. He's talking about a community of believers and how we should live and how we should live with one another and what patience looks like. There's going to be some suffering. Pray. There's going to be some cheerfulness. Sing praise. When somebody has a victory, when somebody sing praise, not just the individual, but also the rest in the community. That's the idea. And verse 16 says, confess your sins one to another, pray for one another so you may be healed. Notice the community involved in this. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective, it says. And then it gives the illustration of Elijah, who was just a man with like passions, but he prayed and God moved. What James is saying, hey, you as a believer, you have the same God. So let's believe God. Let's come together and believe God. Let's not come together and grumble. Let's come together and pray. If we're suffering, yes, we're going to be suffering, pray. And then be cheerful also, praise. Praise. If you're sick, call for people of faith, but be proactive in this. We don't just sit back at home. Well, what am I going to do? I'm just sick. No. I don't mean if you have something infectious and you don't want to bring it to rest. That's not what we're talking about, right? Do you understand what we're talking about? And the idea is that we should be a community. We need to get the overall picture of this, that we have to be a community of faith. Help me, Lord. Okay, I got to finish this. All right. Okay, so we're not going to read the rest of that. I think we explained it well. So let's look at the last part really quick. The last couple of verses that he closes, he ends all of this. He says, brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Isn't that a powerful, interesting way to end his letter? Verse 19, James highlights the reality that believers can drift away from truth, but also the responsibility of others to lovingly restore them. Verse 20, the act of restoring someone is life-saving. It rescues them from spiritual death and brings forgiveness and reconciliation. And I got some cross-referencing scriptures that speak along those same lines. And finally, the last page. There's community responsibility here. Faith, remember, the title of this whole teaching on the book of James is Practical Faith. Faith isn't lived in isolation. Believers are called to watch out for each other. Another theme is restoration, not condemnation, on these last two verses that we looked at. The goal is not judgment, but bringing somebody back to truth and life. It speaks on the power of grace. Turning someone back covers sins, showing God's mercy at work through human action. And then the final emphasis of James, the letter ends not with doctrine, but with relational responsibility and practical faith in action. Isn't that powerful? Not with doctrine, but with relational responsibility and practical faith in action. I think we've all known, I think it wouldn't take long if you begin to think that you know someone who's wandered from the truth, who once walked with God. You know somebody like that? Maybe it's somebody in your family. Maybe it's a child, or maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's just a church member that you used to attend church with, but now they're not serving God anymore. So, what should we do about that? I'm opening it up right now. We're opening it up right now. What should we do about that when we see somebody who's struggling? Can I ask you a question? Have you ever had to do that? Have you ever been able to actually restore such a one as James says here? If anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, have maybe you've been one who's wandered and somebody's helped to turn you back. Or maybe you were the one who helped turn somebody else back when you saw them wander. Either experience, has anybody ever walked in that? You have? You have? There's nothing more special than being able to see somebody return home. And there's nothing more special than if we wander and somebody comes to us. I've had those moments where I've been wandering and God used somebody to kind of bring me back into place, I maybe didn't wander too far from the church per se, as I was always, but in my heart I was wandering. See, this is important when we're talking about practical faith. The enemy says, write them off. God says, if possible, restore. And there's nothing more beautiful than we can see people restored.